So, some years ago, at a training, I heard a metaphor about how stress happens, and how we manage stress, and how to take care of ourselves. And I loved it, and I've adopted it, and I've been sharing it, and clients tend to love it too, because it's a very simple way of explaining how stress works in our body. And it's called the stress bucket. So imagine that inside every human being, there's a bucket that collects stress. And things happen in our lives, and we react to them, and it causes some stress. And what happens is the stress begins to accumulate. And we always have a little bit of stress in our lives, but if we don't have a way of releasing the stress, it keeps accumulating. So everybody has a stress bucket, and everybody has a line on their stress bucket. If this is 0 and that's 10, somewhere around 8, everybody has a whelm line. And if you're not careful, the stress continues to accumulate, and it crosses that line, and what happens? You're overwhelmed. It goes over the whelm line, and you're overwhelmed. You didn't know that that's where overwhelm comes from. Too much whelm. And what happens when people get overwhelmed is they have a coping skill that they use. Now, the interesting thing about coping skills, if you remember the DBT circles, we have the logical brain, we have the emotional brain, and we're moving constantly back and forth between logic and emotions. Where do you think we are when we're overwhelmed? We're in our emotional brain. And when we're in our emotional brain, we're not thinking logically, and we make poor choices. So when people are emotional, the choices they make for coping are things like alcohol and drugs and gambling and shopping and eating and sleeping and sex and isolating and even suicide ideation. Those are all coping skills that people come up with when they're stressed out. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. It's just that they're not very good coping skills. In fact, if you use any one of these as your major coping skills, it doesn't empty the bucket. In fact, it will actually add stress to your life. Too much alcohol, too much drugs, too much gambling, any of those things, if they're used in excess, actually increase your stress. So they're not very good coping skills. Stress is coming at us every day. This tendency of life to throw stress at us, I made up a name for it. It's called the Gump factor. Stuff happens, and there's no getting around it. Stuff is always happening to us in our lives, and what we need to do is we need to figure out a way to empty the bucket. Now, in an actual bucket, what I would do is I would just poke a hole in it here at about the 2 level, and what happens? Stress starts draining out through that valve. And eventually it stabilizes, and it never it stops building up. Stress comes in, rises, hits the valve, and then drains out. So that's a way for the bucket, but that doesn't work for us. You know, I'm not going to recommend that we put a little valve on the side of your hip with a little nozzle on it to drain your stress out. That's not going to work. So what is this 2 valve metaphorically? This 2 valve is what I call daily living skills. Daily living skills. Things that we can do every day to keep our stress level down. That every human being ought to do every day. Keep your stress down. And the first one that people think of is what? Exercise. But I'm not a fan of exercise, and so how I like to think of it is exercise just means getting the body moving a little bit more. Thinking about, well, as an example, when you're going to the parking lot, when you're going to a grocery store, park as far away from the main door as possible, and just get that walk across the parking lot. If you're going into a building with multiple floors, take the first 4 floors by the stairs. Just get a little bit more movement, a little bit more exercise. The idea of exercise is to get the heart beating a little bit more, to get the body oxygenated by breathing a little bit more deeply. This will reduce stress. Another thing on my daily list is play. And I talked about that yesterday when I talked about the fact that play is an essential element of joy, of happiness. And we ought to play a little bit every day. How you play doesn't matter so much. Playing with a dog or a cat. What the research says is people who own pets and play with them are healthier and happier. You've got kids or grandkids, play with them. Now, for me, because exercise has always been a bit of work, I've had a couple of gym memberships and I didn't use them. What I discovered was I can combine these two and get exercise.
Yay!
So, somebody wants me to go on a 4-hour walk with them, I'm going to pass. But if they say, let's go play golf for 4 hours, I'm out there once or twice a week because it's play, it's not exercise, and I'm having fun. Somebody says they want me to do jumping jacks, I'm going to pass. But if you give me a volleyball and a net, I'll play volleyball for a couple of hours and have a great time and get exercise. Make sense? So the idea is making exercise play, or combining the two. Other things on my list of daily skills. One of the biggest ones is mindfulness. Now, we talk about mindfulness every day here at Brookside. And the main group on mindfulness is at the beginning of the week, so I like to kind of reintroduce or explain the concept of mindfulness. And how I explain it is, first of all, to imagine your life as a line, a timeline. This is the past, this is the future, and that right there is this moment in time, now. The brain actually has slots of awareness. I've heard people say that you can pay attention to approximately 5 things at once. So you can be listening to me, listening to the sound of my voice, and you can be watching me, and you can even be taking notes, and maybe you're aware of the chair, or maybe you're aware of the heat in the room, the temperature of the room. But around 5 things, your mind is full. So if somebody walks in and you turn and you wonder at the person walking in order for you to pay attention to them, you have to quit listening to me, and you have to quit looking at me, and now you're looking, that's an eye, and at the person coming in. So your attention is shifted. You only have 5 slots, and so you empty me and you start listening to that person. So the interesting thing about mindfulness is there's a whole group of people who have a lot of their attention on the future. A lot of their attention is focused on what's going to happen in the future. What happens if, and what happens when. And thinking about the future, you tend to be anxious. There's a whole other group of people who focus mostly on the past, thinking about what did happen. Why did I do that? And why didn't I do that other thing? And those people tend to be depressed. One of the fun things about this model that it really helped me understand, I wanted to use black, because we have the 5 slots of awareness, there are people who focus on the past and on the future, and they are both anxious and depressed at the same time. And that made sense. I always kind of wondered how people could be both anxious and depressed, because they're kind of opposites. Depression is kind of low energy, and anxiety is kind of high energy. But this model of the 5 slots helped me to understand that. The next thing that it helped me to understand is that by replacing my thoughts about the future or the past with thoughts about this moment, thinking about this moment now, and filling all of my slots with now, anxiety disappears, depression disappears. Now, it's not a cure for anxiety and depression, it's a vacation from anxiety and depression. But interestingly enough, if you continually practice mindfulness, you'll find that your anxiety begins to fade, because the value of mindfulness tends to spread out from just a mindful meditation to all elements of your life. And within a few weeks or a month, you'll notice that you're less anxious, because you're not having thoughts about the future. And you're less depressed because you're not having thoughts about the past. So how do you do this concept of mindfulness? How do you spend your time in the now? The idea of mindfulness and being in the moment is focusing on a very specific thing, and that is your 5 senses. Seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, smelling. Because mindfulness is not about thoughts. Thoughts are always either about the past or about the future. Instead, you want to just focus on one of your 5 senses. And the interesting thing about mindfulness is you can use any one of the 5 senses. When I first started learning to meditate, it was really popular to use vision. And we would sit and stare at a candle flame. And every time your mind started to think about fire or candles or wax or when it started to think about things, you would just bring it back to looking at the candle flame. So your mind would go off and start thinking about something in the future, and as soon as you realize, oh, I'm thinking, you come back to the candle flame. Or you go into the past, you're thinking about something that happened, and you come back to now. I remember when I'm looking at the candle flame, I noticed, first of all, that there's kind of a teardrop shape. And the other thing that I remember noticing is that the flame wasn't actually on the wick. It looked like it was floating just slightly above the wick. I also noticed that it was different colors. The top up here was white, and then there was a little bit of yellow, and then down here was red. That there were these 3 different colors in that flame. So that's just mindfulness, just noticing what you're seeing. One of my professors in college came up with this technique, a visual technique he called it spotting, where you close your eyes and notice spots in the darkness. And what you do is you just watch, pay attention to the spots. Do they move? Do they stand still? Again, another mindfulness technique. And every time your mind starts to wander into thoughts, you just come back and you look and you see the spots. And then I learned transcendental meditation, and transcendental meditation uses a different sense. It uses the auditory sense. And in TM, they teach you a mantra that you think. Just repeat mentally. Now, a mantra is a sound. Let me change that. A mantra is a word that has no meaning. Every word that you know has 2 components. It has the sound. For example, the word chair, there's a ch sound, there's an eh sound, and there's a ch, air, So there's the sound of the word chair, and then there's the meaning, something to sit in. And so with a mantra, what you do is you take a word and that has no meaning, and it just has a sound. My favorite example of this is the word Ruslabsa. It's a word that I learned from some Russian friends. Now, so far, nobody, when I mention it, has any clue. All you hear is the sound, Ruslabsa, but there's no meaning associated with it. That's how a mantra works. You get a sound that you just mentally repeat that has no meaning. So you don't think about the word, you just listen to the sound. In case you're interested, the word Ruslabsa is Russian for mellow out or chill, relax. Ruslabsa, so it's a fun word. You can also use tactile sense. Eckhart Tolle taught me a technique using your hands. So what I'd like to do right now is just invite you to practice this with me for a minute.
Did you meet him?
No, it was a video training. So sit and allow your hands to hang free. If you have a chair that has arms, you can sit with your hands sticking off of the arms so that they're not touching anything. If you don't have a chair with arms, you can either lean forward on your knees or you can just let them hang. But the idea is to close your eyes for a minute. And what I want you to do is just notice that your hands aren't doing anything. If they're not moving, if they're not doing anything, how do you know your hands are still there? You can't see them. They're not moving, but it turns out there's a sense of aliveness. You can sense that your hands exist. In the medical profession, they call this proprioception, but it's just a fancy word for that sensation of fuzziness or tingliness. Maybe you're aware of your pulse in your hand, or maybe just aware of a kind of a sensation. What we're doing right now is not doing. We're not doing anything. We're just allowing our hands to just be hands, just to sit and be alive. And as you find that sense of aliveness, your mind kind of goes quiet. Now, usually within about 20 seconds, your mind will start thinking, this is really weird, this is really stupid, this is really cool. Those are thoughts. Notice that you're having a thought, and then let it go and go back to finding that feeling of aliveness. Put your attention on your hands. And again, the mind quiets down, and after a few seconds, 5, 10, 15 seconds, the mind will have a thought. When you notice you're having a thought, acknowledge it. Oh, there's a thought, there's a feeling, and then go back, let that go, and then find your hands again. Allow your attention to go to your hands and that sensation of aliveness. And you can open your eyes. I hope you got a sense of what it's like to just notice that your mind kind of quiets down as you pay attention to the aliveness in your hands. So that's a mindfulness technique. Whether you use vision, or whether you use sound, or whether you use tactile sensation, they all work. Now, I've been teaching meditation for a lot of years. I started teaching meditation in 1975. And sometimes when I mention meditation, people will say, oh, I tried it and I can't do it. So when I ask them, well, why can't you meditate? They say, well, I can't stop thinking. And that surprises me because the act of meditation is not about stopping thinking. You can try to stop thinking, but it'll never happen. I don't stop thinking, and I've been doing it for a lot of years. Mindfulness meditation is not about stopping thoughts. In fact, just the opposite. Thoughts are a part of the process of meditation. What happens is the mind will get really quiet, the body will settle down, your breathing will slow down, your heart will slow down a little bit, and then your body will release some stress. And when your body releases that stress, you have a thought. So over and over again, you're in the now, just being aware of your hands, and then you go off on a thought. And as soon as you notice you have a thought, you come back to your hands. Maybe it's a thought in the future, and then you're back, and your awareness is on your hands, and you're just feeling, and then all of a sudden you have a thought about the past. And then you just let it go and come back to your hands. So the process of mindfulness is a constant movement. Thoughts, awareness, thoughts, awareness. I call this focus on the hands, or focus on the breath, or focus on a mantra. I call that your focal point. Like I said, you can use any one of your senses. And the idea is it alternates. It moves thoughts and then focal point, and thoughts and then focal point. Did you have a question?
I do. Why do people, like with TM, like why do people pay for focal points if it could be anything?
Well, Transcendental Meditation is set up in a very systematic way, so you actually have a guide. And you go through 7 steps, 7 processes. You have an individual measure, you have an individual mantra. They say that the TM mantra is chosen for you as an individual. It's specific to you. And then you have 3 follow-up sessions where your meditations are checked. And then for the rest of your life, you can get your meditation checked for free at any time. So it's a kind of a package deal where you get a lot of support. A lot of people feel insecure about meditating, particularly if you read it in a book or you watch some video, you begin to have doubts. So it's really nice to have someone to go talk to and find out if you're doing it right. As a TM teacher, there's actually a 28-step process of helping a person check their meditation. Questions that I ask, we meditate together, that I ask a few more questions, and we just go through a process of making sure that it's effortless and easy. Make sense?
Yeah, I've just heard some weird things about you.
So, this is the process of mindfulness, and honestly, I believe that every human being ought to be adding it to your daily schedule, doing it every day. Because the interesting thing happens, this letting go of thoughts in meditation, over time, it begins to happen in your life. So here's the thing. In our educational system, we're taught to remember things. It's what I call Velcro mind. They give you something and it sticks in your brain and you don't forget it. Many years ago, I had to memorize the fact that Columbus came to the Americas on the Nina de Pinta in the Santa Maria in 1492. And I've never had to use that information. No exam or test or job interview ever asked me, by the way, when did Christopher Columbus come to the Americas? But it's Velcroed in my brain. Mindfulness is teaching us something that we typically don't learn in school, which is how to let go of stuff, how to let go of thoughts. In DBT, we call this Teflon mind, a non-stick surface. And so the process of mindfulness is learning how to let thoughts go. Let thoughts of worry, let thoughts of obsessive thoughts, not hold on to them. So it teaches us this concept of Teflon mind. So I recommend it on a daily basis. Also, in my daily living skills, I recommend good sleep. They say there's an actual institute, a National Institute of Sleep. And in the National Institute, they say that an adult should get about a minimum of 7 hours of sleep a day. Or stress builds up. And now most of us knows what it feels like to not get enough sleep. We feel kind of irritable, and our eyes are scritchy, and we're uncomfortable in our body, and it's just stressful. The interesting thing that some people don't realize is that the National Institute says there's also a maximum. And they say it's around 9 hours. And that a lot of people don't think of too much sleep as stressful because it's a very different kind of stress. Whereas here we have scritchy eyes. With too much sleep, there's a kind of a grogginess. The mind is a little bit foggy. The energy is a little bit low. There's even a kind of an esteem stress, a sensitivity that, because you're not accomplishing anything, or you didn't get what you wanted done, so you got to beat yourself up. So it's a very different kind of stress. They say for adults 7 to 9 hours until you get to about age 60, and then they say it drops. So it's somewhere between 6 and 8 hours over the age of 60. An interesting thing, that between the ages of about 14 and 18, teenagers, it's actually much higher. 12 to 14 hours of sleep, they say, for teenagers. Because they're growing and they need that. I wish my parents had known that. They insisted that I didn't need any more than 8 hours of sleep, and now the research says, no, teenagers need more sleep.
Didn't you say 10 to 12? Sorry, didn't you say 10 to 12 3 weeks ago when I was here?
I don't remember. That might be a little high. It might be 12 to 14. I can go back and look.
That's the age.
You said 12 to 14.
So sleep is an essential piece. What else on my daily living skill? Good nutrition. My favorite metaphor for this is my car. When I was learning to drive, I grew up in Fairbanks, and when I was learning to drive, there was no such thing as leaded gasoline. It was just gas. But you could buy cheap gas and you could buy expensive gas. And if you bought the really cheap gas, your car didn't run very well. You could actually hear, they had this thing called pinging. The valves would clatter or ping, and you'd know that there was too much water or too much lead. It wasn't good quality gas. So you wanted to buy better gas. Well, it turns out food is our fuel for our body. And in the same way, the car didn't run as well on cheap gas, your body doesn't run well on cheap food. So food becomes really important for the stress of the body. 60 Minutes did a show here several years ago, and what they talked about, 15-minute segment on 60 Minutes, talking about the most toxic thing in our manufactured foods. That most toxic thing, turns out it was sugar. The researchers that they interviewed said the human body does not need sugar from artificial sources. We don't need sugar in our foods. Our foods don't need to be sweetened. In fact, the body doesn't like sugar because it's too intense. It's like jet fuel for your car. It will burn, jet fuel will burn out the engine in your car, and what happens with sugar when you intake it, the body can't process it, so it converts it to glycogen and stores it in the fat cells. So there's a tendency to gain weight. The researchers that they interviewed said, really, you don't need sugar in your food at all. At a maximum, they said about 100 milligrams for a woman and 150 milligrams for a man is about the daily allowance. And that's less than in a single can of soda.
Unless you're climbing a mountain.
And even with climbing a mountain, you don't need sugar as much as you need protein. In fact, protein is really the best source of energy. It's interesting that when people get fatigued and tired, the first thing they think of is carbohydrates or sugar, but what the body really wants is protein. So it's learning to condition the body. At least that's my understanding of it.
Tell that to the sports coaches in high school.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So beginning to, what I'm suggesting is that, I just have a basic understanding of this. I've been studying it for myself. I don't claim to be a nutrition expert. My point, I think, really is study nutrition and learn how your body functions best. The woman who was doing the interview said, well, wait a minute, guys, I like to have sugar on my cereal. I like to have sugar in my coffee. And he said, well, there is a supplement that you can use in place of sugar. Most of the artificial sugars, it turns out, aren't very good for the body. He said there's one that hasn't been found to have any problems, and that's a thing called stevia. And stevia, it turns out, is a plant that you powder the plant and you use it just like you would sugar. And they know that it's good because even diabetics are being recommended to use it now because it has no impact on your blood sugar level. It has the value of sweetening, but it doesn't change your blood sugar, which is really what the problem with sugars is. So if you're interested in this, one of the ways to study this is a thing that you can get for free on the internet called the glycemic index. And what it is just a list of foods by the amount of sugar that occurs in them. They don't list sugar, at least in the one that I did, they didn't have sugar. So right at the top are white bread, white rice, white potatoes. Those things are really high in sugars, and pasta is up there, and they don't recommend that you eat a lot of that. And then you get about halfway down the list and you'll find things like peas and corn that have sugar in them, natural sugar in them, but not as much as the white breads and white rice. And then down near the bottom is where you find the leafy vegetables and the broccoli and cauliflower and those kind of things. And they say what you want to do is you want to eat mostly from the bottom to the middle of the glycemic index list, because that is the lesser amounts of sugar. You get the nutrition, but you don't get that extra sugar.
What about fruit, like pineapple?
Fruit in moderation is good for you, because what you're doing with fruit is you have the bulk, so that it slows down the digestive process. He did, however, say we should probably not be drinking much fruit juice, because it's too intense. We should be getting the juice when we eat the fruit. That's the best way to go about it. So this researcher actually discouraged the fruit juice. Or if you're going to have fruit juice, to water it down.
So the whole like juicing, like people are like obsessed with that.
Well, the juicing thing is problematic. The best way to juice is to use something like a Vitamix that juices it, but it keeps the bulk, it keeps the fiber in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll slow down the digestive process. That's supposed to help. So that's my understanding of nutrition. Basically what I'm saying is investigate it. What my wife and I came to was working on what's called the Paleolithic Diet, kind of a modified Paleolithic diet. The Paleolithic diet says lots of lean meats, lots of vegetables and fruits, and very limited grains, and virtually no sugars. The only thing we really have much anymore is the stevia. Though occasionally we splurge and get a chocolate mousse or a donut or something like that. But generally speaking, the focus is on health, keeping the stress level down. Next on my list is people. Now, I like to say that there are two kinds of people. There's the introvert and the extrovert. And how I distinguish the two is when your energy is low, when you're feeling depleted, the introvert will go and isolate and be by themselves and kind of rebuild their energy and clear their mind. Whereas the extrovert wants to be around people. They'll hang out around people and they'll get their battery charged by socializing and hanging out with people. There's no right or wrong. It's helpful to know which one you are. But the interesting thing is that even the introverts need people in their lives. And how I describe it is a thing called feedback. This room has a heating and cooling system. And in order for it to work, it has to have a feedback loop called the thermostat. The thermostat checks. If it's too warm, the heat comes on. If it's too cold, the heat comes on. If it's too warm, the air conditioning comes on. and it's based on this feedback loop. Your car has feedback system. The speedometer, the water light, the engine light, those are all feedback systems, keeping you knowing how the car is running. A plane has a feedback system when it's in automatic pilot. So a plane flying from Portland across country to New York, as soon as it hits cruising altitude, they put on the automatic pilot. The automatic pilot works like this. It's flying towards the destination, and it'll start to drift south. And at a certain amount of off target, the automatic pilot says, dude, you're drifting, and come back up. Well, it doesn't just stop when it's pouring in the right direction, it starts drifting north. And then when it gets to a certain degree, it gets a signal to go back. So the whole time the plane is flying, it's kind of moving back and forth in the feedback loop, and it gets to the destination. This also happens in nature. When I grew up in Alaska, the Fish and Game Department decided that we were having a problem with wolves, so they put a bounty on wolves. It said, if you bring in a wolf pelt, we'll pay you $75. And the Alaskan male kind of went nuts. And a lot of these guys went out hunting. Wow, we get paid to hunt. So they went out hunting wolves, and it was really successful. Thousands of wolf pelts. The next year, we were swarmed with rabbits. There were rabbits in the driveway and in your gardens and on the streets. You could practically walk across the main highway and not touch asphalt because there was so many dead rabbits on the road. It was horrific. What had happened was we'd eliminated nature's feedback system. The wolves kept the rabbits in check. Well, it turns out humans don't have a feedback system in the same way that the rabbits do. Our feedback system, it turns out, is other people. So that person in your life who's saying, chill out, you're getting way too upset about this, is giving you feedback. That person in your life who's saying, come on, let's go get engaged, let's go volunteer, you have to go vote, is feedback. Getting information about a recipe, or getting information about a book, or getting information about a movie, that's all feedback. We need that feedback. There was a guy who challenged the system. This guy, when he was in 5th grade, his IQ was measured at 158, something like that, in the high 50s. They say Einstein was 138, so this guy was off the chart smart. And by the time he was 18, he graduated from college with a PhD and was hired as an associate professor in the Midwest. And as a college professor, he wrote a paper on how do we blend nature and government. How do we combine nature with government? He wrote this paper and he mailed it out, and everybody ridiculed it, made fun of it, ignored it, threw it away. He got mad. And he decided he was going to prove that you could live off of nature, so he moved into a one-room cabin. No electricity, no running water, to live off the land and show you how to live off nature. He was fine for the first 5 years, but in 1986, the FBI came in and dragged him out and threw him in prison. Not because he was living in a shack, but because he was starting to mail pipe bombs out to people that made him mad and that he didn't like. He went off the deep end. His plane drifted too far south. You probably know him as the Unabomber, but his name was Ted Kaczynski, and History Channel did a whole show on him and how he was a quirky and highly intelligent guy. I'm suggesting that the fact that he had nobody in his life giving him feedback saying, dude, you're getting kind of weird here, he just kept drifting and he had nobody to give him feedback. That was in 1986, and he's still in prison. So we need feedback in our lives. We need people to help us. It's what we call in psychology, what we call a reality check. A very important other thing is what's called purpose. In the 1940s, this guy goes to the richest man in the world and says, Mr. Carnegie, teach me how to become wealthy. Carnegie was the richest man in the United States. He was a railroad baron. And Carnegie said to this guy, no, I'm not going to teach you how to become wealthy. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll hire you. You go out and interview all the wealthy people you can find, and you report back to me on how they did it. See if I can learn anything. So this young guy goes out and interviews over 460 people and writes one of the best-selling books ever printed in the business world. The name of the book was called Think and Grow Rich. His name was Napoleon Hill. And it became a bestseller, and it continues. This was in the 40s, and it continues today to be on the top 10 of the paperback best-selling books in the business world. And every few years it rises back to the surface because it's really successful. It's really helpful. In it, Napoleon had a list of 12 components of wealth, only one of which was money. Health was in there, family and friends was in there, all of these different components of being wealthy, of being rich. But at the top of his list, he had having a definite major purpose. In some of the more recent books, they changed the word purpose to passion, but it's the same thing. Having something that you love to do, something that you're excited about doing, something that you would do, whether you got paid to do it or not, tends to be an essential part of living, of existing. Having a purpose, having something you're passionate about, makes you want to take care of yourself and exercise and practice mindfulness and get good sleep and eat healthy because you have this drive, this passion. It's a reason to get up in the morning. It's a reason to take care of yourself. I've come up with 3 times when people lose their purpose and struggle. Losing your job or retiring. In both cases, people often will come to places like Brookside because they're depressed and they don't have any direction. They're kind of going around in circles and they're not taking care of themselves because they lost their job or because they're retired. There's an uncomfortable statistic that says that if a person retires and doesn't come up with a new passion, a new purpose, the lifespan is 6 years when you retire. People kind of waste away. So if you want to find something, a new passion. If you retire from your job, come up with something else. And an interesting thing, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be volunteering. It could be learning a new skill or a new language or any number of things. Traveling around the world. Doesn't matter so much what it is as long as it's something that you're passionate about. The third one, by the way, I said that there were 3. Losing your job and retiring. The third one is the empty nest. A lot of parents, when their kids leave home, have this void, this lack, this missing purpose. And they got to come up with another purpose. They got to come up with a way to fill their time and their energy. So finding a purpose turns out to be a really powerful part of happiness. I like to end the talk with 2 things. One is having a routine, having a schedule, and that's just to organize these things so that you're doing them every day. And then, the most difficult one for me, but one that I find really interesting, is journaling. Now, I've never liked journaling. I've had 4 of these blank notebooks that I started to journal in, and I get bored pretty quickly. And then my guru teaches me how to journal, and I've been journaling religiously every day since. My guru's name is Oprah, and she taught me how to do a gratitude journal. Really simple. At the end of the day, you write down 5 things that happened today that you're grateful for. There's no degree of quality at all. It could be something as simple as, like, last night on my gratitude list, I watched The Big Bang Theory. That one, because I love it. It's one of my favorite shows on my gratitude list. I was at Costco one day, and there was a woman ahead of me with a flatbed full of groceries, and I'm standing there with my 3 things, and all of a sudden the clerk starts waving his hand and says, "Come up." And I go around the woman with this big flatbed, and he says, "You only got 3 things, why don't you go ahead?" And I'm out of there 20 minutes earlier, so I was really grateful to the clerk for letting me skip ahead in the line. Little things. It's an interesting thing because you begin to change the structure of your brain when you practice gratitude. Initially, people say, well, it's kind of hard. The first 5 or 6 days, it can be hard to come up with 5 things. But within about 5 or 6 days, it clicks in, and you find that you don't stop at 5. There's lots of things to be grateful for. If you were here yesterday and you watched the video of Nick, the guy with no arms and no legs, it could be as simple as being grateful that you got hands and arms, that you have legs. I used to do a little visualization in my gratitude class where I would have people close their eyes, and I would have them sit for a few minutes and notice the darkness. And then I would suggest to them, imagine that this is it. You can't open your eyes. You've lost your vision. You'll never watch another television show. You'll never read another book. You'll never be able to walk across a room without worrying about hitting something or tripping on something. You'll never see your children's face. You'll never be able to see a sunset or a sunrise. So I spend 3 or 4 minutes kind of talking about the loss. And then I suggest that you can open your eyes and just be grateful that you have eyes. We take things for granted, like seeing and hearing, until we lose them. And then we realize how much we depend on them. So gratitude is the practice of celebrating what you have. Not what you want, but what you actually have. It's a really powerful tool in reducing stress. So here's the theory of the bucket, guys. To sum it up. You do all of these things and your stress level stays down. Mostly. But remember the dump factor? Stuff happens. It seems like every month Forrest throws a brick at me. Now when that brick falls into my bucket, what happens?
Overflow.
The stress goes up really fast. That brick's falling in. Towards overwhelm. The fascinating thing when that happens is most people, when their stress goes up, they stop exercising. And they stop playing because they're stressed out. And their sleep is disrupted. And they feel irritable and tired, and they stop doing mindfulness. They stop worrying about nutrition, and they start eating more junk food and more sugar. They stop socializing. They're not working on their purpose. Their routine is disrupted, and they've got nothing to be grateful for, so they don't do the gratitude. Basically, they shut that valve off. One of the beautiful things about the bucket is seeing, oh wait, the only thing that was emptying that bucket, I just stopped doing. That's a guarantee that I'm going to hit overwhelm. So one of the first things to
You're
get
talking
is,
about the exercise?
don't stop doing those things on the list. Because that was helping. And then you say, well, but wait, that's not enough. My stress is going up. So we need to put another drain valve in here at the 4 level. And maybe even another drain valve in here at the 6 level. So if the stress starts rising, when it gets up to here, it starts draining out. And if it keeps going up, it starts draining out here. The whole idea is don't let it get to overwhelm. The more stressed you are, the more coping skills you should be doing. And that's what 4 and 6 are. 2 is the daily skills, and then the 4 and the 6 are coping skills. Coping skills you use when you need them. So in the handout that I made for this group, by the way, I have the bucket, I have a blank bucket here that you can fill in and talk about what your stressors are coming in and how you drain the bucket. I even drew a picture of the bucket that I use. And then I have 3 pages of coping skills, 225 coping skills that you can use to manage your stress. That ought to be enough. 225 ought to make it, ought to be able to find something on there that you can use. But wait, there's more. If you purchase this package today at no additional charge, I will throw in an additional 77 coping skills. Yes, friends, you too can have these additional coping skills if you purchase this package today for a very low fee. Nothing. So then the second list is 77 coping skills in and around Portland. Things like going to a Winterhawks game, or going to the Rose Garden, or ice skating at the mall, Lloyd Mall, or Saturday Market, going to the Vista House at Crown Point, to Multnomah Falls, the Grotto. A lot of people forget about the Grotto. The Grotto is a beautifully quiet place, beautiful garden, really serene, on 82nd and Sandy. By the way, I encourage people to read this one with care, because there's a couple of odd little things in this list. Number 36 says, offer to babysit for a friend. And I'm thinking, stress reducing? Babysitting? No, it doesn't work for me. Maybe it works for you, but for me, babysitting for a friend is not stress reducing. And then you read number 37 and you gotta wonder about the person who made this list. Take a child to Chuck E. Cheese. That is stressful. At least my experience of Chuck E. Cheese is stressful. So, read it with care. By the way, when I talk about these skills, the daily skills, I want to change that word. What I want them to do is become habits. Not skills, but habits, something that you're doing automatically. And what I say is that it takes 28 days, 28 consecutive days of doing a skill to make it a habit. So the last page of the handout is actually a 28-day grid where you can put down the skills from the to list, or you can add some of the skills that we teach you and do them for the next 28 days. Just check them off each day. At the end of a month, it ought to become second nature. It ought to be a habit that you're doing automatically. Make sense? So it's a powerful way of self-care. Now here's a fascinating thing. The higher your stress, the more coping skills you're doing. And the less you should be helping anybody else. There is a kind of a tendency for people when they're stressed out to be worried about other people and helping other people. And what I'm saying is no, it doesn't work. It's not, you're not being helpful. If you're stressed out and worrying about other people, chances are you're not helping. You're just stressing them out. So it turns out there's an actual metaphor that I ran across that talks about this, and it goes like this. In the event of a loss of cabin pressure, a bag will fall from the ceiling. Pull that bag down, straightening the hose. What am I talking about? On an airplane, right. The oxygen on an airplane, right. Now what's the very next instruction?
Do yourself first before you do others.
Well, why wouldn't I put it on my kids before I put it on myself? Because if you pass out, you can't help anybody else, right? So first self-care and then other care. It's the same principle here. First, get your stress level down, and then help other people. But as long as you're stressed out, you're not going to be a lot of help to other people. Does that make sense? Cool. Now I have one last little video. This is a technique or a prescription that I've gotten permission to share with you. I don't prescribe because I'm not a doctor, but this is a particularly good prescription. It fits in very well.
Stella Artois has partnered with us at water.org to help provide access to clean water to women and their families in the developing world. We can be the generation remembered for ending the global water crisis once and for all.
There's lots of things to be grateful for. If you were here yesterday and you watched the video...
Do you find yourself longing for the apocalypse? I did. I was looking for a reason to live. Do you find yourself longing for the apocalypse? I did. I was looking for a reason to live. Do you find yourself longing for the apocalypse? I did. I was looking for a reason to live. Hi. Are you feeling tired, irritable, stressed out? Well, you might consider nature.
From the people that brought you Getting Outside comes prescription strength Nature, a non-harmful medication shown to relieve the crippling symptoms of modern life.
Nature's recommended for humans of all ages, and it's great for pets too.
Nature can reduce cynicism, meaninglessness, anal retentiveness, and murderous rage. In clinical studies, Nature is proven to decrease work-induced catatonia.
Caution. Nature may cause you to slow down, quit your job, or seriously consider what the you're doing with your life.
If you are overly cynical, jaded, or emotionally numb, you may need to increase your dose of Nature. Do you have trouble being even mildly uncomfortable? Nature may not be right for you. Side effects may include spontaneous euphoria, taking yourself less seriously, and being in a good mood for no apparent reason.
So ask your doctor if nature is right for you.